Metrorank is celebrating the power of cricket in shaping strong, confident and resilient women through their partnership with the ECB and as champions of women's and girls cricket. They're empowering young girls and women to play cricket. They're helping them build leadership, teamwork and confidence, all while having fun. Because when women step onto the field, they're not just playing a game, they're building skills for life. To learn more about their initiatives, check out the link in the description. Hello and welcome to the Wisden Women's Cricket Weekly podcast. All change at the top of English cricket. Jon Lewis has left his role as England head coach after 2.5 years in the job. He's the first casualty of a winter to forget. Mumbai are the WPL champions for the second time, and we'll also look ahead to the English summer that is really not that far away. I'm Yas Rana, and with me today in person are Lauren Winfield-Hill and Katya, Witney. And by the way, if you want to see England in action this summer, they're playing India at Lord's on July the 19th. So head to the Lord's website to get your tickets for that. Lauren, big news dropped a couple of hours ago. We were really thankful about the timing of the news. Jon Lewis has left his role as England head coach. What were your initial reactions to that news dropping?
Oh, I think you're always shocked, but you're not shocked. I think it's always it's sad because there is a person behind the role. And obviously I've been involved in the start of his sort of coaching journey with England, and he's a good man and he's a good coach. But, you know, it's one of those things where you look at results. I think there's been some really good things that we've seen from, you know, Jon Lewis's reign. The Ashes here, you know, I think we're sort of hanging on to that. We've been clutching at that for a little while. But it was the best English white ball series, you know, in the ODIs and the T20s that I think we've seen for 4 or 5 years, you know, the performances. But ultimately of late, particularly when it's mattered in the World Cup, you know, you're going to get judged on World Cups and Ashes series. That's just the way it is. And, you know, I think the pure, I guess it is about results, but sometimes it's the nature as well. And I think the nature of that Ashes series in particular was just, you know, was pretty disastrous from a performance point of view. So, you know, it's always like, you know, they've reviewed it and somebody's come under fire. But I think, you know, equally there won't be too many people hugely surprised based on, you know, the last sort of 6-7 months.
Katya, we've obviously talked about the Ashes a lot and the World Cup before that a lot. But more generally, as Lauren alluded to, there were some really positive things from Lewis's reign that should be remembered too.
Yeah, I was thinking back to the start of when he came in and just how much optimism there was around that time. Because I remember when he came in and there was that tour to the West Indies, which I actually think you were on at that time. Yeah. And then England came out in the first ODI and hit 300 plus, I think, in the first ODI, and then chased down quite a low total, but in like 12 overs in one of the first T20s as well. And then came out in the T20 World Cup, the 2023 T20 World Cup, and played this really fast brand of cricket that for that side in particular, we hadn't seen them play before. And it felt like this is a coach who's come in and injected so much freshness into a squad and a side that had become quite stale over the last 12 months. I mean, we talk about the losses they've endured over the last kind of 6 months or so, but before Lewis came in, they'd lost the Ashes 12-4 in Australia, which at the time we thought was pretty much as bad as it gets.
It wasn't too bad after all.
They'd had that amazing test match, but the white ball series had been pretty dire. And then they'd crashed out of the Commonwealth Games in the semi-final or the last group game that they crashed out
Semi-final, I think, yeah.
Semi-final. And then they'd lost to India at home, and it felt pretty dire towards the end of Lisa Kiteley's tenure and pretty stale. And in comes his head coach that you feel like has injected this freshness in, and then you go into the Ashes and there are huge crowds and one of the greatest comeback stories I think ever in cricket, even though it didn't quite get over the line, that still should be remembered as one of the great comeback stories. But then it just didn't quite move forward. What were your thoughts around when you went to the West Indies about the atmosphere around the side when he came in? Yeah,
like I couldn't agree more. There was so much optimism. I think one of Louis' strengths is, you know, he really does captivate a room. You know, when he speaks, you feel like, oh, I'm really excited about, you know, moving my game forward, playing this brand of cricket. And I think that was genuinely the vibe. There was a real optimism around the group and an excitement of being in that space again, which, like, you know, we certainly lost, I think, particularly over COVID. It was obviously a difficult time under Lisa Kiteley. And he came in with a real enthusiasm and, like you say, optimism. And it was infectious to the players. You know, I think everybody was really excited to be on that journey. And I think, you know, not necessarily that it's not that faded. I think it's almost like that honeymoon period, isn't it? Where you sort of, and you're seeing results maybe against lesser teams and you think, oh, this is amazing. Like we're playing really well. We're putting big totals on the board. People are playing with freedom and expressing themselves. But I think the biggest thing is, you know, that honeymoon period fizzles out a little bit, and actually how to do that under high pressure against the best teams in the world was probably the gap. You know, it was really exciting. You know, we saw performances against Pakistan here that were pretty convincing at times and aggressive in that approach. But it was from particular players and not the whole group the whole time. And also the ability to do it under pressure. Because I think what we did see at the T20 World Cup and in the Ashes, that wasn't the same sort of aggression and brand. And obviously conditions change all around the world and things like that. But slowly it sort of became less aggressive. You know, in the T20 World Cup, we saw times where it was a little bit passive, a little bit insular and safe. And then the same in the Ashes. Really, the only sort of, I guess, aggression we saw was Sophia Dunkley and probably Lauren Bell with the ball as well. You know, so it sort of fizzled out. It felt like that honeymoon period fizzled out, and actually the how of doing it under pressure, beyond, you know, the exciting work. I think sometimes like you get a lot of exciting buzzwords thrown about and everyone's like, oh, up and about. And it's like, what do they actually mean and how does that play out under pressure? And I think that was the bit that England have sort of lost, is that, you know, what does that look like? What does that look like for each individual player? What does that look like for each individual matchup in certain conditions? And actually like the nitty-gritty cricket adapting parts.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I'd say from his reign is that if you look at the team he inherited to the one that he's leaving, is the seam bowling department's completely changed, right? So Anya Shrubsole and Nat Sciver-Brunt are leading the attack in 2022. And that transition's actually gone really well. And he's worked with Fowler and Bell in particular and improved them as players. So I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. My question to you, Lauren, is how much can a coach change things? You know, does a change of coach, history remembers Robinson coming in and that being a really big deal. He wins the World Cup within the first 18 months of his reign. How much of a difference can you make? Because sometimes it felt with Lewis towards the end that whatever his message was, he was struggling to get it across in the same way. Like I'll never forget in the World Cup game against West Indies, him literally coming onto the field to basically like, we are not who we are as a team at the moment. So how much can a coach change when they come in?
Yeah, I don't think that's solely on Jon Lewis personally. I think if we're talking about the key messages, you know, and how he is, I don't think it changed. I think he was very consistent. My understanding is he was very consistent with his messaging. It was always very, you know, it was pretty clear on the style of cricket that he wanted to play. Hence why when they weren't playing it against West Indies, it was like, come on, this is not us. But I think the how bit and what that actually looks like from player to player in batting, bowling, fielding is your assistants and your captain. You know, because they're the bit, you know, he's like this overarching like culture environment driver. The way in which like coaching's set up now is the head coach is like the bird's eye view, and they set up the environment and the culture, and they work with, you know, the skills coaches that they have underneath them. But ultimately, I think, you know, that the how and the skill level of the players comes from your assistants and you know, from your captain a little bit in terms of being really role specific. You know, having conversations with. If you're being aggressive and it doesn't work out, having those reassuring conversations, things like that. You know, I think it's the head coach is always the one that gets the sniper. But actually, I think the responsibility can filter down a little bit more beyond that.
I think you can also look at some of the domestic stuff in that as well, in terms of what Lewis had to work with. So when he came in and the 100 hadn't been going that long, 2 seasons when he came in?
Yeah, it would have been two
yeah, and there was that injection of, again, freshness into the women's game. And you had players like Alice Capsey coming through and Izzy Wong and these kinds of big personalities entering the women's game. But you still had that regional system underneath it that was becoming more and more obvious that it wasn't fitting the bill. of moving the English women's game forward. And I know we're now on the cusp of obviously redoing that whole thing. But I think at the end of it, not having that system that really effectively funnels players through kind of hamstrung him a little bit as well. So I think that's worth paying service to. But equally, as you said, with the ways in which England were losing at the end becoming so predictable, the pressure stuff, plus the weaknesses against spin and all that, that's almost what's done for him in a way, that England losing in that way so consistently over a period of time. If you're not able to change that, that's not going to be something that you can fix after not being able to change it for so long.
Lewis had no grounding in women's cricket before he took the role. In the next head coach, would that be a red line for you?
Well, that's a really good question.
There was something quite fresh about it when he came in, and I completely see the thinking, a fresh pair of eyes, you can sort of shake things up a little bit. And I'm not saying that must be a must all the time, but given that he had a particular perspective, do we need someone now who really intimately knows the ins and outs of the women's game?
No, I don't necessarily think it needs to be somebody that's worked in the women's game as such, but I think there'll be certain characteristics and certain strengths of the coach that needs to come to the forefront. And I think, like I said, with whether the assistants that have been there stay there and what that looks like as well, I think is really important. I think galvanising this England group is the biggest thing. Is making them excited, bringing them together closer as a group. Like we spoke a little bit about during the Ashes, it looked like at times as soon as the pressure was on, everybody just dispelled rather than coming together. But yeah, I think it always helps understand. I think the female game, and there's probably a few subtle differences, and a lot of changing rooms in the men's game have changed a lot now. It used to be very like hard school, and we see from a lot of men's changing rooms now is there's a lot more of a safe space, and it's a safety net. We'll catch you if you fall, and we don't mind you getting it wrong. And like you hear Stokesy talk a lot about vulnerability and all those sorts of things. There's not that many differences between a male changing room and a female changing room, but I think there is differences with females in terms of how they deal with pressure, in the expectation piece, in the perfectionism piece, in the safeness of, withdrawing rather than being the show ponies. I think there's a lot of introverted players in the England group at the minute, particularly. So I think those sorts of things and understanding those sorts of things are going to be really important for the next coach, whether they've worked in female sport for that understanding, or it's just a strength of theirs as a coach. Who knows? But I do think there are some subtle differences in terms of like girls just need to be egged on to take risk. I think, whereas probably in the men's game, you look at a few players, they almost need to be dialed back and be more risk aware. So I do think
That's
there are
really
some
point.
there's some differences. I don't know, like I always I can't remember who it was, but there was a coach at Yorkshire and he's like, the main differences I see is like working with men and women is like you'll sit the blokes down in like an appraisal or something and they'll be like, oh, I'm so good at sweeping, I'm really good at hitting over the top, like watch me go, I'm really good at these things. And then I'll go into an appraisal and I'll be like, oh, look, I need to work on my paddling, like probably need to, cut a little bit better, and then not talk about any of my strengths.
Yeah.
So like there's probably a prime example there of like two, and it's not blanket for every male and every female, but I just think that's
Slightly
two
different.
really good examples of the little nuances and the little differences between the two.
Are appraisals that granular? Like you go through like specific strengths and weaknesses in your own game? I mean, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Even when you're looking at a lower level though, and this is a much lower level, but looking at that difference between how girls and boys work within the different games. I remember talking to a grassroots coach when I went back to my local cricket club, and he was talking about the difference between working in the girls' side and the boys' side. And he said all the boys are interested in is hitting it as far as possible in the nets and bowling it as fast as possible. When you go and coach the girls, they're much more technically interested in how you do it correctly rather than hitting it further. And coaching that kind of bowl it fast, hit it harder was a lot harder to ingrain into girls than it was to boys. But maybe that technical stuff was harder to ingrain in boys who were just interested in hitting it further.
Yeah.
But it is really interesting.
Yeah, I think so. I think girls generally overthink the small stuff. And that ties into the technical things. Like I know myself as a player, like I need to be taken away from the technique and the what could go wrong and be like, right, where can I take risk? Because my natural tendency would be to overthink the small stuff. So I almost need like someone to be like hype the risk and, encourage the risk and that sort of stuff and not worry about that.
And I also think that's a really hard thing to actually get across. So you can say take more risk, but risk is something that the person who's taking the risk needs to feel. It's not like you just be more risky. It's you have to feel in a mindset where you feel like I can actually take on more risk, which is obviously a very difficult thing to properly get across.
Yeah, and I think like people talk about like, we're going to come out and play with positive intent. Well, what positive intent looks like for you might be different to me. Like you might use your feet to a seamer. I might sit deep in the crease. So it's like I feel like there's loads of buzzwords that get thrown around, and that's where like the assistants and the skills coaches, help you work out the how of what does positive intent and taking risk and taking the game on and all these buzzwords that get thrown around. What does that actually look like?
Obviously, there's a vacancy now. Bookie's favourite, Lottie Edwards. Immense success as a coach in the last 5 years. So she's got 8 titles, I think, if I've counted correctly, across various comps since 2020. She's just led Mumbai to another WPL title. I guess as a leader, why do you think that she's had the success that she's had?
I think she creates a good environment. I think people get excited about playing for her, playing in, in the spaces that she's in. I don't think she's, I've worked with her at Adelaide Strikers when she wasn't the head coach there, but she was the batting coach. She's not overly technical. She does make you feel good. She makes you feel like you're ready to go out there and take the game on. But I think, the general vibe and the general sort of chat around spaces that she coaches in is that she creates a good environment. The team's very together. And I think she's pretty well organised and well drilled, in terms of the analysis and matchups and recruiting people for particular roles, being clear on what those roles are. I think that's her sort of her real strengths is. And I hear her talk a lot about what she was like as a captain and a player, and actually how she's very different as a coach. She's almost learnt a lot from her playing days and her captaincy, where I don't think she was as collaborative as what she could have been. She was very much like, I'll bear the weight of it. Whereas I think now in her coaching era, it's quite different. It's very much a real family vibe.
That's really interesting. Do you think she should take the job? She's the people's choice at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's quite funny actually that she's just won a title last week with this news coming out. It's almost like, there's a little memo.
Just in case you forgot.
Yeah. So I think it's almost uncanny that she's just won another title. Absolute legend of the game over here. Obviously got great. She always said, didn't she, when she first come into coaching, that she wanted to do her time. She didn't want to walk straight into an England job just because she was an England legend, and she wanted to get things on her CV and get multiple experiences all around the world. So whether she feels the time is now, and she's obviously sort of thrown her hat into the ring. And she's got experience all around the world with some of the best players in the world. I think she'd be a good candidate. I think she understands, the players, and she communicates really well. She shows that level of support and care. She does she seems to be the name. Equally, we haven't had many other, because this hasn't been reviewed and announced. I think she'd been the obvious candidate that's thrown around, but we haven't really had it. There hasn't been a lot of other candidates at all thrown around.
I often think with coaching appointments for national jobs, you can get someone completely out of the blue because the number of people who could do it is theoretically huge. So you could just get someone that no one's thinking about at the moment who wants to do it.
Well, Jon Lewis was probably that, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Really, in terms of some of the names that went for that job with more experience in the female game. Jon Lewis was probably that surprise.
One of my favourite headlines ever was Jon Lewis beats Jon Lewis.
Yeah.
The two candidates with the same name. Yeah. One of the names that came to me when I was thinking about it actually was Jonathan Batty, who you've worked quite a lot with. He coached in the WPL, had quite a few coaching gigs around the world now. What makes him a good coach to work with from your experience?
Would you be saying hands off? We're keeping him over.
Yeah, no, we want him to keep him at the ovals. Yeah. Now, JB's just a really consistent operator. He's emotionally very consistent. He doesn't get too high, doesn't get too low. So it's quite nice as a player, whether you get it right or whether you get it wrong. And, performance-wise, results-wise, nothing really changes. I think that's a real strength of his. He communicates well. He's well organised. He sort of just does the really basic things that are often missed, which causes quite a lot of disruption in an environment. He just does them really well. He knows how to make players feel good and feel like they're ready to take things on. He's a good, he's very analytical in terms of, where you're constantly trying to be better and pick out little things that we can do better. But yeah, no, I think he would be a good candidate. There's probably a couple of others, like I think of like Luke Williams and Ash Nofke as well. They've both got very good CVs in the women's game. Obviously, Luke Williams has won with Adelaide Strikers, works with Lottie. At Southern Brave, has won with RCB. Same with Ash Nofke, in the Big Bash here at London Spirit. So there's a lot of good candidates that have got, like really good experience in the women's game now, which we probably didn't have 5 years ago.
I think I think Lottie's obviously the obvious person, but if it's not, I really wouldn't be surprised if it's an Aussie. Given all the chat about like the differences between the two structures, the chat around dealing with pressure, that sort of stuff. Like if you're looking for what could help you on a superficial level to be more hard nosed and be more Australian, get an Australian in is a sort of thing. It's sort of how this stuff often goes. In the WPL this week, Mumbai won it. They beat Delhi in the final, who have now finished runners-up 3 years on the bounce. Mumbai defended 149. Nat Sciver-Brunt had an extraordinary tournament and an amazing final. She put on about 100 with Harmanpreet Kaur to help Mumbai go from 14 for 2 early on to 149. She also took 3 wickets. Katya, why are they so good? That's the second time they've won it.
Well, I was pleased they won it because we backed Mumbai last week.
Yeah, we did. We got that one right. We have got a lot wrong in the history of this pod.
Yeah.
A lot right, sorry, but
that's probably our first accurate prediction.
Yeah, so we backed a side with Nat Sciver-Brunt, Hayley Matthews, and Shabnam Ismail and Amelia Kerr, and they won. So it's a good prediction. You don't need to look beyond those names really to see why they're so good. There's a direct correlation in franchise leagues, understandably, between the number of balls overseas players face and the number of balls overseas players bowl and the amount of matches you win and the amount of matches you lose. And having 4 in-form, firing overseas players like Nat Sciver-Brunt, her tournament was incredible. It was quite cool seeing Elise Perry and Nat Sciver-Brunt trade places for the lead run scorer, and then Nat Sciver-Brunt just took off in the semi-final and the final. Not so much the final. And also Hayley Matthews was the 3rd leading run scorer in the tournament, joint leading wicket taker in the tournament alongside Amelia Kerr, also a Mumbai player. And then when you've got Sciver-Brunt, Matthews, Kerr and Ismail all to bowl 4 overs, those are your 4 over bankers, you only need 4 overs of local players. So that limits the amount of balls you're relying on from your local players. And Mumbai had some really good options there as well. They had Amanjot Kaur and Saika Ishak, who got rid of Annabelle Sutherland in the final, I think, for a duck, and that's another key moment in the game. They've just got a really good setup of how their side works, and that core of overseas players that they've retained is a really good base to work from. And I just don't think you're losing too many games when you've got Nat Sciver-Brunt in that kind of form in your side.
Yeah, I mean, to have 3 of your all-rounder slots, 3 of your overseas slots on all-rounders, if you're trying to get overseas players to do batting and bowling, get all-rounders in. An extraordinary campaign from Sciver-Brunt, 523 runs at 65, 150 more runs than anyone else. There's going to be a lot of people watching and listening to this who will be starting pre-season nets. They're getting outside, the weather's warming up a little bit, and there'll be a lot of young kids who will be thinking, I want to be like Nat Sciver-Brunt. So we're going to do something a little bit different here. And we're going to look at some of her highlights from the other day, and essentially work out why is it that she's so good with the bat. So I think one shot that she plays, I think she plays as well as anyone in the women's game, is this shot here, where she really hits it hard behind square on the leg side and gets across. What's the key in what she does there, and why does it bring her so much success?
Well, I think the first thing to note is that is probably Kanwar's best ball. She misses that, that's rattling into middle stump. So I think, and that probably epitomises why she's so good, is she's got the ability to hit bowlers' best ball for boundaries. And it sounds really simple, but I think what she does is she scores all around the ground. She relocates, but her head is so still on contact. Whether she chooses to stay on middle and just, not move her feet or move around. But when she relocates, she's really still on contact. I think what we've seen in this competition that we probably didn't see so much in the T20 World Cup and in the Ashes is her ability to be brave into relocating early. I think I also see like someone like Jemima Rodriguez does the same thing. When she's willing to move, give herself room or get across the crease or come down the track and do it early. So she dictates the play. And I think that's been the real key thing for Nat Sciver-Brunt is she's made those moves ball 1 or ball 2 in the over. What we probably saw in the Ashes was trying to do it under pressure, ball 4 and ball 5. So it's very different trying to execute it under pressure. But I think in T20 cricket, if you're brave enough to dictate and make the move at the start of the over, I think, if you can get a boundary in your first 2 balls, the over generally goes for 8. I'm pretty sure that is the stat. And I think that's almost been like her blueprint of how she's gone about things is she's tried to put pressure on the bowler early in the over. And then it almost is like, I can just cruise into the back end of the over.
And she's not waiting for a bad ball, right? As you say, so people who are not watching this and just listening, the delivery here, as Lauren says, it pitches just outside off stump from around the wicket. It's hitting off stump if she misses it, but she's hit that a good ball, as you say, Kanwar's best ball behind square to the long leg fence. And I guess her power game is also something that stands out. So.
This is great because this is the highlights I was watching on the train. So I'm like, I know what's coming now.
Okay, this isn't a great ball, but something that we've talked a lot about in the last few weeks is the players who are having a lot of success at the moment in T20 competitions are the good 6 hitters.
Yeah.
What is it about her power game that stands out? Obviously, she's really strong, but is there anything technically that she's doing that people listening to this can maybe work on at home?
I actually don't think that's a terrible ball from Danielle Gibson. She's gone for the back of the hand and it's actually got up at sort of hip height. So really that should be quite a hard delivery to hit high up the ground. But what she does in that particular shot is she almost knows when to transition from just playing into almost hitting mode. And I think hitting mode, she gets deep in the crease. You can see from that, she's probably a foot off the stumps. So she gets a really good base. She's got a good wide base. You see, like, she picks her hands up nearly to her head there. So she's got really good leverage of that bat swing. But she's still, and she's got a good base. And I think you'll hear that, people have come away from high elbow and transfer of weight through your front foot and all these sorts of things. It's like, can you get still? Can you get a good base? And if you've got a good base, you can generate some really nice power. Yeah. And I think that's what, she just does basics better than most of the batters.
Well, I think what's really interesting there is you're definitely right in terms of the ball actually not being that bad. Looking at it again, that's on a length, right? That's not short. When I first looked at it, I thought, that's a long hop.
And back of the hand.
It's not.
So the other thing is, like, if you're a batter and actually the change of pace to hold that position and to, as you can see there, like to keep your hands back and to keep that leverage of your, the toe of the blade up. When someone's gone a short delivery, most of the people are down here at that point because you're going, you've been done for a lack of pace and the pace off delivery. But what she does is she almost holds and then delays her swing. And that's been an evolution of probably the last few years as well, is practicing clearing the ropes and getting into that position, because it is a different position to sort of traditional batting where you probably see for her first 30, 40 balls, it looks quite different. And then she gets into this like deep loaded position, which is her, I guess, like when she's looking to bring a power game into it. I remember seeing it here actually in the 100 last year for, almost just eyeing off that leg side boundary this more and just going, well, I'm just setting myself.
Where she's holding the back is like a baseball player, isn't it? It's so high.
But to do that and to hold your swing back against a slower delivery is a lot harder than it looks, because the whole reason like people use changes of pace is to mess with your swing plane, to get you through it early, so you're down here and you're out in front and it goes straight up. Whereas actually the ability to almost stay loaded on your back hip, keep your hands up, often a pace off delivery, like it's a remarkable strike from a delivery that shouldn't be that easy to hit that far.
She's good, isn't she?
She's very good.
In New Zealand have been very busy. They drew a home T20 series against Sri Lanka. Shamari Atupatu scored an unbeaten 64 in the run chase in the first game before Susie Bates and Brooke Halliday both hit 40s in the second before the third was washed out when New Zealand were going very well. They're currently 1-0 down to Australia. Beth Mooney hit 75 or 42. She is going to break Meg Lanning's all-time Australia record for most T20 runs in the next 2 or 3 games, most likely, which is pretty cool. She's a bit of a machine at the moment. And just finally on today's show, Lauren, just wanted to ask, we've not really talked about the county season and particularly Tier 2 for quite a long time. Now the dust has settled, are you pretty happy with the lay of the land?
Yeah, I think it's become clear what sort of fixtures look like. And I think everyone's, like certainly from a Yorkshire perspective, everyone's pretty clear. We go away on Monday. We've got a pre-season sort of competition actually where we play Surrey, Essex, Tasmania, and I think a team from UAE as well. So we're using that as an opportunity to get some real good games under our belt. But yeah, it's sort of become a lot more clear with fixtures. Got a few double headers, things like that lined up. So it's I think everything sort of feels like I can only speak from a Yorkshire point of view. It sort of feels like the dust settled and it's it's in a real positive place. The girls have enjoyed. They're ready to get out of the East Stand and outdoors. But yeah, everyone's really excited about it. It doesn't feel like this Tier 2, this year for Tier 2 for obviously Yorkshire, doesn't feel like it's such a daunting thing. It's actually like a really exciting opportunity for a lot of the girls where, this year in Tier 2 will hold them in such good stead in Tier 1 and almost seeing that as a real positive to actually almost just pave your path without being thrust straight into Tier 1 cricket.
That pre-season tournament against those Tier 1 sides must be an extra bit of an incentive there.
Oh, 100%. Like, Richie Pyra's, he's really big on us, competing and showing, all the stuff that we've done in the winter, really. But I think everyone's in great shape, like even some of the youngsters. I've been into training this week and there's, some 16, 17, 18-year-olds. I think, oh my goodness, where have these been? Like these girls, we've got a leggy who's like, is beautiful pace, bowls a really attacking pace. People like that would have never been unearthed. You're not knocking Katie Levick out, you're not taking the ball out of Katie Levick's hand. So I think these massive positives and opportunities that will be had from obviously a pretty unfortunate situation. But like I say, there's been some real improvements from the girls that have got an opportunity that they wouldn't have normally had.
Yeah. I was just thinking, what are the differences for you at this time of year this year compared to what they would have been like under the regional system last year?
Yeah, I think it probably doesn't feel as like, whoa, I'm going to be thrust into the season, because the volume of games is not, is not as many as going into Tier 1. And you almost play like 2 games a week from now until September. But I think because I've been away playing this winter, it sort of I don't feel as like, oh, I really need some big volume of games now. It can almost sort of like ease my way into the season a little bit. Use this, this obviously pre-season tour to just get around the group, just see where the girls are at, sort of come together as a group, connect really nicely. And like the main thing, like I probably see this like the next few months as a real, almost like mentoring a lot of the girls, like trying to bring the club together, trying to get some key messages across. So I think it's always it's probably like I've taken more focus off my own game at the minute and really trying to help everyone else along. Because I also think it's a clunky time of year because everyone's learnt all these new skills indoors and they're pulling out ramp shots and reverse sweeps, and then you get outside and you're like, I don't want to play any of it. Like I can get out now. So I actually reckon it's a bit of a transition period in terms of getting outdoors and competing in games, and just be brave. Get the tools out that you've learnt, and helping like the youngsters sort of, like bring that out. You've not learnt it for no reason. Pull it out. Well, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Yeah, and it's not long until the season starts, just around the corner. Well, that is everything for today's show. Cheers, listeners. We'll be back at the same time next week.